Good day, everyone. My name is Edin Sumo, a Master's of Science student at Grand Canyon University, currently majoring in cybersecurity, and this presentation is for my CYB 610 Penetration Testing and Risk Management course. Today, I will demonstrate comprehensive vulnerability assessment using three automated scanners, Necto, OWASP, and Nessus on my Capcheck tool. Then I will analyze, discover vulnerabilities, and also discuss ethical disclosure standards. Let's begin by reviewing the assignment objectives. So the assignment will focus on network enumeration and scanning with multiple tools, then identifying and analyzing vulnerabilities using flaw hypothesis methodologies, and then I'll also discuss the ethical disclosure standards. So let's dive into the enumeration phase. To start with, I booted up my Kali and my Capcheck tool. In the left of my terminal, I run an ifconfig and it tells me my IP starts with a 192, which confirms it's on host only. On the right of my terminal, run a basic ping sweep enumeration of my subnet to confirm my Capcheck 2 IP address. And as you can see in the screenshot, it starts with a 192.168.56.104, and it's the only host on the network as well. And it also has all these open ports. Prior to running my scan, I installed Necto using apt-get installed Necto in my Kali terminal as shown in the screenshot. It installed successfully. So Necto is an open source scanner that examines web servers for vulnerabilities and security issues, making it useful for reconnaissance during penetration testing. So I ran Necto-H against my Capcheck 2 IP to scan the web service on port 80. From Necto results, I identified three critical findings. The server runs an outdated Apache version, meaning no vulnerabilities are in patch. Second, directory indexing is enabled, exposing the internal folders structure to attackers. And then third, the WP config file is exposed, which is critical because it often contains database credentials. So these findings represent real security weaknesses, which is common in poorly secure web servers. So after installing Necto, I installed OWASP as my web application security scanner through my Kali terminal, and then I started it. Then I went to automate scan based on some instructions to begin testing the web application. So after running the OWASP on my Capcheck tool, the scan tested those pages for weaknesses. Once it was completed, I reviewed the results in the alert tab. The most serious issue was the SQL injection on the login page, as you can see in the screenshot, the first screenshot, meaning info feeds aren't validated and an attacker could bypass authentication. Zap also found no cross request forgery token protection, and it also showed missing clickjacking protection, making the site vulnerable to common web attacks. So on this slide, I'll be comparing Necto and OWASP. Necto is a web server scanner. So in my scan, it flagged the outdated Apache version and directory indexing. It's fast but doesn't interact with forms or inputs. OWASP goes deeper into web application itself. When I scan my Capcheck tool with Zap, it detected SQL injection on the login form, missing cross-site request forgery tokens, and also missing clickjacking protection. So Zap is more interactive and focuses on how the application handles user input. Both are open source security tools used for vulnerability scanning. The difference is that Necto checks the server while Zap tests the application behavior and user input security. So cross-site scripting allows attackers to inject malicious scripts into web pages viewed by other users. For an example, an attacker could inject JavaScript into a login form. When another user visits a page, the malicious code executes in their browser, potentially stealing their session data or credentials. Prevention includes input validation, output encoding, and implementing a web application firewall to filter malicious requests. So cross-site request forgery tricks authenticated users into performing unintended action. For an example, let's say I'm logging to my Chase Bank, and attacker could send me a malicious link that transfers money without my knowledge. Since I'm already authenticated, the bank server executes the request thinking it's from me. Prevention includes using cross-site request forgery tokens, setting cookies to same site mode, and implementing double submit cookies to verify requests actually come from a legitimate user. So as you can see in these screenshots on this slide, I installed Nessus Essentials on my Kali terminal, register for a license, enter my activation code, and then the scanner begin to download its plugin database to prepare for vulnerability scanning. So after the plugins finished downloading, I selected the web application test scan as per the assignment instruction, and then I also selected my target and IP of my Capcheck tool, and then I clicked the save to start the scan. As you can see on this slide, these two screenshots shows that when the scan was launched, when it was in progress, and then when it completed. Approximately it took 21 minutes. So the scan results show vulnerability severity percentages and identify specific issues like CGI abuse, HTTP vulnerabilities, and outdated PHP on Keyabject 2. As you can see on this slide, when I click on the PHP vulnerability, Nessus show is unsupported and it also marked as critical with a CVSS score of 10. This can identify other high severity findings with CVSS scores and explain that the PHP version is no longer supported, meaning no security patches are provided. So Nexus recommendation is to upgrade the PHP to a supported version to prevent CGI query screen code execution vulnerabilities. So this next slide shows a table that highlights the 10 most significant vulnerabilities identified on my Nessus scan of Keyabject 2. The main risks involve outdated PHP versions, CGI and HTTP exposure directory indexing, and missing security headers. The recommended fixes include updating PHP, disabling unnecessary HTTP methods, restricting directory access, and also applying a proper security headers to reduce the system attack surface. So for vulnerability mapping, although I've talked about it in the previous slide, using PHP unsupported version is an example because Nessus automatically maps vulnerabilities to security frameworks. The detailed view shows a CVSS score of 10, which is critical severity along with CPE identifiers and plugin IDs. All 10 vulnerabilities on the left of the screenshot on this slide have the same framework mapping in Nessus, allowing us to prioritize fixes based on industry standards and severity ratings. So my hypothesis is that my Keyabject 2 is vulnerable to SQL injection because when I ran an Nmap scan, I noticed port 3306 was open, indicating my SQL database is running. So using OWASP also, I discovered that the login form had a vulnerability to SQL injection attacks. Zap also successfully injected a payload or 1=1 to verify this was exploitable, and it also showed me the exact vulnerable URL. So based on this, I'm hypothesizing that the SQL database is vulnerable and could be exploited to bypass authentication or run malicious commands on my system. So the root cause of my SQL injection vulnerability is that the application doesn't validate user input. Doing my OWASP scan of my Keyabject 2, I discovered that the system trusts whatever user type and sends it directly to the database. The reason this exists is because the code uses insecure practices, that is, it doesn't scrape or sanitize its parameter. This also happened because the system runs outdated PHP with old development standards and has never been security reviewed or patched. So for my attack vector, since OWASP already provided a URL where SQL injection can be exploited, I tested it manually. I entered the payload admin or 1=1 at the login page and successfully bypassed authentication. Once inside the main console, I found command injection and the ping feature. I injected whom and it executed as the Apache user, proving I could run the system commands. This shows the complete attack chain from initial access to remote code executions, and I also provided screenshots as a proof. As pen testers, we must follow responsible disclosure practices. According to SET, NIST, and ISO 29147 standards, we notify vendors privately and give them 90 days to fix issues. Why? Legally, the CFAA protects us when we coordinate disclosure properly. Ethically, immediate public disclosure of the SQL injection I found would help attackers before patch exists. So my recommendation is report privately, wait for fixes, then disclose publicly. In my lab, for an example, I found critical vulnerabilities. In the real world, I would report this to the vendor first, protecting users while maintaining legal compliance. And lastly, this last slide is my references. That is where I got some of the information I've been talking about throughout this presentation. Thanks for your time and stay blessed.